Hope everybody is enjoying the mum so far. As you guys have seen on the agenda, this presentation is going to be about mobile Wi-Fi with GPS tracking using the LtAP. It's a solution that we saw early on when Mikrotik launched the LtAP, and we decided we'd give it a go. So we took our own company vehicles and tried it out, and it works really well. So just a bit about myself. My name is Tim, or Timothy Simmons. I'm the CTO at Scoop Distribution. I've been there since 2008, and that's the same amount of time when I started looking at Mikrotik. So that was my first exposure. Later on in 2013, I attended my first Mikrotik user meeting in Zagreb, Croatia, and then later on in Johannesburg that same year. I'm also a Mikrotik certified trainer since 2015. Just a bit about Scoop Distribution. So we've been a Mikrotik distributor since 2003. Scoop's been around since 2001. We've got branches at all the major cities, being Joburg, Cape Town, and Durban. And we also export stock into the SADC regions of Africa. We also provide online ordering, payment, and shipping, and obviously certified training as well. So just to give you an idea of where we started, Scoop started in Cape Town back in 2001. That remains our head office. Later we moved to Gauteng in 2008, and then our most recent branch in Durban in 2014. We're not a huge staff complement. We're quite a small team, but we're effective. Right now we've got limitations in our stock holding in Cape Town. So next month we'll be moving into a 3,000 square meter premises, which is 3 times the size of our existing building. So at the moment we kind of chock-a-block full in Cape Town. So this should improve our stock holding. Hopefully we'll hold enough stock for you guys to keep buying Mikrotik stuff, right? Okay, onto business. So with the LtAP system, we decided we had requirements of our own. This is by no means the only way which you can do this. We want a GPS tracking system in our vehicles. At the time, we were using these Garmin devices, which was really, they're good, but they're kind of cumbersome. So using the Mikrotik product, it allowed us to open up a whole new world of possibilities. So for our case, we wanted the GPS tracking system. We wanted to be able to access the system whenever we wanted to via web interface. From there, our drivers could get Wi-Fi connectivity, easy access to services. None of this, send you a please call me or run out of airtime. We can implement basic services like the maps as well as voice over IP to get communication to our drivers. We also wanted notifications during office hours, and we wanted a low maintenance solution. We didn't want something that was going to fail as soon as we implemented it. So why use Mikrotik's LtAP? Well, they're not very expensive. That's the first part. You don't have to pay continually monthly fees on a piece of hardware that's installed into your vehicle. It's also got the integrated Wi-Fi and GPS capability, so that's a necessity for the Wi-Fi access. They're very durable. We've had ours installed for the better part of a year now, and we haven't had any problems, not a single day. Through power cycles, these things are they're grafting. They're working hard. The LtAP has got flexible power input options, so you're not restricted to 1 voltage. You can go 12 volts, you can go 5 volts, which is ideal for vehicles. And then its size. The form factor it's small. You can hide it easily in almost any vehicle. So that was a big attraction for us as well. And then finally, this is Mikrotik we're talking about, so there's tons of stuff you can do. Over and beyond what you might see here today, we decided to make this a starting platform for any interested users so that they could go and use the system and develop how they want. So just looking at our topology, we've got branches in these major cities. We're doing deliveries with our vehicles probably about 2 to 3 times a week. The idea was to put an LtAP inside each one, and from there we decided to use Rain as our SIM provider, mainly because you pay as you use with Rain. In hindsight, it might not be the best in terms of their coverage, but we're in the urban areas, so the fact that we're driving around in the urban areas, we don't experience much downtime. In fact, very little at all. Once we've got these things connected to the internet, we can then send the GPS coordinates from the vehicles themselves via HTTPS to a web server, which we can access anytime we want. So your first decision you're going to have to be making is which LtAP. So there's pros and cons besides just price. So LtAP Mini, it's smaller, it's less pricey than what the LtAP Heavy Duty is. There's a couple of differences in terms of how many SIMs you can keep on each device. The LtAP HD has got 2 mini PCI Express cards, so essentially if you purchase another modem, you could have a fully redundant system if you wanted to. For our purposes, we didn't require that, and also the HD wasn't out when we decided to install our systems. We didn't need huge amounts of CPU processing power or gigabit. One of the benefits of using the LtAP HD, I would say, is that you can pretty much just plug on your external antenna. No opening up the case, very, very simple solution, but you pay a bit more. One other swing option would be that the HD is slightly bigger, so it'll be probably more difficult to sort of hide away in a vehicle. So for our project, and if you guys do this in future, you're going to need an LtAP. So you can choose one of them, the LtAP or LtAP HD. You're going to need to get a UFL to SMA female connector if you're using the Mini, because you're going to have to install that directly onto the GPS modem. You're going to need a GPS antenna, a web server, localized or in the cloud, and you're going to need a few hours to figure everything out. Luckily, we figured a lot of the stuff out for you, so the presentation is designed for you to access it after the mum, and you can use what we've got and implement it in any way you want to. So the first hurdle that you will find, if you check the Mikrotik forums, the internal GPS antenna that's on the LtAP is ineffective when you enable the LTE interface. So that meant there was tons of people trying to use the GPS feature, and they got no results. You'll need to attach an external antenna to make use of its functionality. I see Mikrotik did change the hardware design slightly, and I thought maybe they would have fixed that, but you're still going to use external antennas here. There's no getting out of it. The next hurdle that you might come across is, even though you install the external antenna, you might not be getting any GPS connectivity. And once again, after looking at Mikrotik's forum, there's a number of people saying that even though they've connected their connectors up, they weren't getting any GPS coordinates. It's likely that they blew the GPS connector because it uses an active 3.3 volt antenna. So when you're preparing this, you will need to make sure your stuff is powered off, otherwise it's not going to work. So with the LtAP Mini, which we used, you're going to have to open the case, do a bit of old school DIY installation. You're going to have to fit the UFL to SMA connector. We've got 2 screens here, so that one's a bit far away. I'll try this one over here. So the GPS antenna fits over there via UFL. We drill a hole into the enclosure, run about there, and your end product will look like that. It had been a while since I had installed a SMA connector, and it was actually quite tough. So just be patient. If you damage the little GPS UFL connector, there's no real way back from that. So take your time, especially if you've got big fingers. It might be a problem. But yeah, just be aware of that. Looking at the LtAP Mini, if we take a look at its block diagram, you'll notice that where you see the RS-232 interface, it uses the same hardware path as the GPS. So because the serial interface is enabled by default, you'll need to disable the default serial interface. So whether you prefer CLI or whether you prefer Winbox, you can just go ahead and disable that. When it comes to the HD, the story is a bit different. Looking at the diagram, you'll see the GPS portion is not sharing the same hardware path, so therefore you can leave your default serial instance enabled. So with everything connected, we can power this thing on, and we can start the configuration of the GPS. There's a couple of changes you'll need to make to the configuration. So the first one is you'll need to set it up into decimal degrees, as this is what the OpenStreetMap API, which is the maps we used for our solution, to be able to receive those coordinates. So you'd need to set them up in DD format. You need to set your GPS antenna to external mode using the serial instance, the default serial instance. From there, if you've done everything right, you'll start to see GPS coordinates like you see over there. There's a couple of guys I saw on the forum having issues with this. Mikrotik's recommendation was, don't do this in a cave where you don't have any access to the satellites. So yeah, do it by a window or something, works great. You should see results within, probably about 30 seconds or so. So with the GPS functioning, the next part was to set up a web server. So we decided to go cloud-based. It costs us about $5 per month for this system. And on that web server, you're going to have a few applications installed. I'll explain to you why you need those applications shortly, but essentially you're going to need Apache, PHP, SQLite, and in our case, we used HTTPS. So you don't have to go that route. You could use VPNs and stuff if you're worried about your GPS coordinates floating about on the internet. For us, we weren't really too concerned about that. The server side of things was actually the biggest headache for us. The LtAP configuration was super simple. I must admit we did have issues in the beginning, and we couldn't figure it out. And it turned out it was just our knowledge on Linux. We're using older servers. As soon as we went through a fresh install, everything worked great. So if I can recommend something, start fresh, avoid those head-scratching moments. So just stepping back a slide. We created a walkthrough guide on GitHub. So Mikrotik was nice enough to post tons of information about the configuration of the web server, but we didn't find in a lot of detail, and there was a lot of people around the world that were struggling to get this working. We decided once we had completed our solution that we would publish the results. You can get them there. If you check out the presentation, there's a step-by-step guide on how this web server would be configured so that you can use this for yourselves. So in order for this to work, we obviously have the GPS coordinates available on RootOS. Our next step was to post those GPS coordinates to our web server. This uses a command in RootOS that sends the GPS information in JSON format up to the web server. On the web server, you'll need Apache and a script which can accept those GPS coordinates and send them into the SQL database that's running on the server. From there, you can go to your front end. So we did a bit of customization on the front end of our system. We used OpenStreetMap because it's free. I wouldn't say that it's as good as Google Maps, but you don't pay anything for it. With Google, you're going to pay. So that choice will be up to you. OpenStreetMap works great. I'll show you some examples of what our system looks like. Finally, the clients will connect via HTTPS, and they'll get access to the web server. So the next step was to actually configure this. In order for you to do this, you need to use a tool fetch parameter. It's a CLI parameter in RootOS. It's not available for 6.40 and below. It's very unlikely you're going to have a system that doesn't have a newer version of root OS. So I don't think this will be a problem for most. Setting the GPS coordinates to DD format, that was done in our first step when we initially configured the GPS. And there's an example of what's actually happening. So the tool fetch command will go and fetch the GPS coordinates in JSON format, and you could send whatever data you wanted across to any of your servers. Now, in order to do this properly, some scripting is required. So Mikrotik, once again, we're nice enough to give everybody a demonstration of exactly what script you should use, and this is a variance of that. Initially, when we created the script or used the script, we found our GPS coordinates were sort of in the middle of the Mediterranean. Turns out that Mikrotik didn't cater for us people in the southern hemisphere. So we made some adjustments to that, and Mikrotik, I see, have changed their script accordingly to accommodate us in the south. Essentially what's happening is, as soon as you run the script, it looks for the GPS coordinates, it uses the tool fetch parameter, and then posts those coordinates in JSON format up to the server. So once that's working, we need to make sure that the GPS coordinates are arriving at the server at specific intervals. In order for us to simulate sort of like a real-time type of GPS tracking, we decided to do it at 1 minute intervals. So every 1 minute, the script will be triggered. We did that with a scheduler, and that will send those coordinates every 1 minute. So each time we looked at our web page, we could almost see sort of real-time type of movement on our vehicles as they moved around. Initially, when we did the server config, we sat in situations where the GPS coordinates weren't arriving. Taking a look at the logs will give you hints on the server to see whether they're actually hitting your server or not. So I'd recommend checking those out if you're experiencing any problems. But you should be seeing in your HTTP access logs something that looks like that on your server side. Once the coordinates are arriving on the server, you're going to get a picture that looks like that. You can see those red blobs on your screen. That's essentially the coordinates hitting the map. So again, if you're not seeing this, just double check your script. Make sure that it is completely accurate. It's most likely the cause of your problem. But these blobs is what you see sort of driving around, which is okay, but it can be better. So once we had these coordinates being posted, because we're going to be managing the whole tracking system by ourselves, we weren't paying somebody to do any of this for us. The next step was we wanted some sort of notification so that we could see if somebody started the vehicles after hours. So we could receive an email sending us a link to the web server, and from there we could start tracking our vehicles ourselves. So once again, we had to turn to a bit of scripting, and the reason for this is because the scheduler on Mikrotik is a little bit limited for this sort of purpose, because the vehicle, it can be switched off at any time. The scheduler only allows you to run commands on startup or via hours, and that wasn't going to cut it. So because our vehicles are only driving around during the week, we actually needed some sort of notification that will happen during the week after hours, as well as on weekends. So we went hunting for a script. There was some helpful ones along the way. We managed to put a few together to get a complete solution. And our solution to this was to find a script that checked what day of the week it is. Once it's worked out what day of the week it is, it will then send an email based on two other variables. They'll be time-based. So if it's not Saturday or Sunday between 6 o'clock and 7 a.m., and if it is Saturday or Sunday in true Mikrotik fashion. So by initializing this part of the script, we're able to get an email telling us that the vehicle's been started after hours. Now, email is one way of doing it. the reason why we decided to use, or we are forced really to use email, was because we're using RAIN as the provider, which is data only. If you're using another provider, you could use SMSs as well. Might be more convenient, but I'll leave it up to you. You guys can get a copy of the script that we created after the presentation. It'll be downloadable. Once the script is in use, we just need to schedule it on startup, and it'll check what day of the week it is. If it's not fitting between the parameters, it will not send an email. So the presentation was talking about mobile Wi-Fi. For our application, we had just really wanted a basic access point for our driver to connect to. So we just had a basic access point set up with a normal pre-shared key. You could use hotspot on these as well if you wanted to use that as your business case. But you'll need to make sure the hotspot package is installed. And also think about adjusting your transmitter powers on your radios. Remember these vehicles, your radio is installed right there. Unless you want a really large cell size, you could reduce it down. And then in terms of management. So originally I thought, management of these things is going to be a pain because I'm going to have to create some sort of tunneling or something. But we've got a very small fleet of vehicles. We've got 3 delivery vehicles that are driving around. We decided that the really easiest way for us to do this was just to use Mikrotik's app. You're simply walking up to the vehicle while the LtAP is on, connecting to its Wi-Fi. From there, we initialize the Mikrotik app, and we're not really making huge changes to what's going on in the config. Maybe somewhere along the line we might, but for us, it's mainly just keeping these routers up to date when there's major security updates happening. So for us, the app's working great. It's a really simple solution. We've got users created for certain people at each of the branches that they can do this. But if you wanted to do something that was more dynamic, you could use tunneling, possibly roam on as well, to do the management if you're going to go for a larger fleet. So once everything was sort of done from a configuration standpoint, the next step was to actually install this thing. So there's a number of options here. So option 1, utilizing the USB port on the LtAP. Very cool for testing it out, because you don't need to go and fill it around with the car's wires. But not so cool if you don't want it to be tampered with. Most of the USB ports on cars are exposed, so it's nice to have, but if you want a solution that's set, it's better for you to go with option 2, which would be to use 12 volts directly off the vehicle's power supply. So this means you're going to have to tap directly into it. Depending on what sort of vehicle you've got will depend on how you do this. So your warranty might be affected if you're going to strip away wiring and connect it directly to the battery system. The LtAP HD has got a mobile connector. What you see there on my left on this side, it's more secure, but in our case we've used the LtAP Mini, which is just a little adapter, and that thing has been driving around for ages and it's still fine. So if you've ever seen a scoop bucky, this is what they look like. We drive this small little fleet of Ford Rangers. Luckily, we had the same vehicle at each of our branches and made the installation process really easy. In order for you to do this installation, you're going to have to get your multimeter out. Depending on what vehicle you've got, you're going to have to check multiple areas to see where you can actually get 12-volt supply. Make sure that you are testing with a multimeter with the ignition on and off. You don't want to connect this LtAP to the permanent 12-volt supply. It's going to drain your battery completely dead. So with our Ford Rangers, we tried different locations, and we figured out on the passenger side, this was the best. Essentially, we stripped a piece of the 12-volt supply over there. We soldered it directly on and put some electrical tape around that. From there, we could run the GPS antenna directly around the dashboard, and the GPS antenna could sit directly on the dash. So we didn't have to do any major overhaul to get our cabling done. It was actually very simple. Because the space that you see there is quite tight, everything sort of fit really well and snugly. So if you guys are lucky enough to be driving Ford Rangers, there's a really good spot for you. And then in terms of the GPS antenna itself, you want to expose this to satellites. We installed ours in the actual vehicle itself. Originally, well, not originally, this is the original installation, but at our Johannesburg office, we actually installed it on the outside. And it's been robust enough and survived. Nobody's really messed around with it. So either or, I find that this is probably a better way of doing it so nobody can touch it, less susceptible to all the weather and stuff. Mikrotik's antenna is magnetic, so you could just stick it directly onto the car and you're done. So your end result will look something like this. So where you see the red lines is a history, sort of historical database of where the vehicle's been traveling. Now, using just the sort of default setup, this doesn't really give you much. We wanted a web interface that was useful. We didn't want to look at a map like this and not be able to figure out what was going on. So some customization had to be done, and our end result looks like that. So we're using OpenStreetMap. We did a couple of customization to the data tables that you see there. So it'll actually show us when the GPS coordinate is hitting at the 1-minute intervals. And at any moment, we could search for those GPS coordinates and figure out exactly where our driver was. So it's not like our driver is going missing, for time on end. Just that if we ever see big gaps in time or something out of the ordinary, one of our managers can go onto the system, search for the time, and figure out exactly when the driver was. We also customized the little bucky picture that you see over there. So a little vehicle drives around on the map, and we've got our HQ there. The border that you see around there is our delivery area, where we deliver at various branches. And then finally, we wanted, instead of just dots in a map, we wanted to see addresses. So we found an API integration where we could get addresses. So each time we search for a coordinate, we were able to see exactly where it was. In terms of the usage of data inside the vehicles, so this is one area where we thought we were a little bit, not scared, but we might need to add extra configuration to do some content filtering or something. But this screenshot was taken sort of towards the end of January. The GPS data is basically zero. We look at our Durban office, they use no data whatsoever. With maps and phone calls and everything, the Joburg and Cape Town branches, the data usage is minimal. So for us, we could just leave it like this. Maybe one day, if we see high data usage, we could further it and add some sort of content filtering to only allow certain pages or sites or maps or whatever we wanted to. So looking back at our objectives, so we've got a GPS tracking system with a simple user interface. We've got the Wi-Fi connectivity for our driver for the instant messaging, voice calls and maps when he's driving around. And we're able to see when the vehicles are started at irregular times, and it's low maintenance. This isn't a hell of a lot of configuration that you need to do to get a system working. And the system's been running now since May last year. I don't think we've had a day's problem. The LtAP is very good at just switching on and working. I've not seen a situation where we've seen like sort of a loss or lapse in time or something where we weren't able to figure out what was going on. So we're very happy with this little low maintenance solution. And because it's Mikrotik, we could always expand on it later if we decided we need to do things differently. So further possibilities to this, you could add content filtering. Obviously, mobile hotspots is an option for this. And I know that there's going to be a presentation on something about that later on. You could have SIM redundancy or roaming. So both LtAPs have got multiple SIM slots. Depending on what you want to do, you could have redundancy. Something on the LtAP, it only has one modem. So if you want to use 2 SIMs, you're going to have to script that as well. With the HD, you can have separate modems if you want. You could have SMS or instant message alerts as well if you want to integrate with API or just use SMS. And then, you could do tunneling for remote management. Thank you very much. If you guys want to see solutions like this, we do post things like this in our blog. keep in contact. Check out our GitHub walkthrough guide. You can contact me at Scoop or via LinkedIn. And yeah, come see us at our stand. If you guys have any questions about this solution or maybe ways which we could better it, I'll be interested to hear your opinion. Thank you very much.